Hello, and welcome to join me on my next stage passage through the book of Acts. And looking at Acts, this story is going to be an uncomfortable one. So let's have a little look. We're going to read through the first part of Acts chapter 5, although I'll tag on the end of Acts chapter 4 as well. I want to start by just referencing one of my favourite sayings, verses, quotes. Can't remember quite where it's from. Maybe I've quoted this before, but integrity is who you are when you think that no one's watching. Integrity is who you are when you think no one's watching. And I think of that, the meaning of that particular phrase and saying when I think of Joseph. Joseph there in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar, when the two of them are alone, asks him a suggestive question. And he says, No. I have been entrusted with everything in my master's household except you. And one thing leads to another. He runs away, and she makes up a story, and he ends up in prison. But integrity is who you are when you think no one's watching. Even when you think that you can get away with something, will you? Or will you say, no, these are the values that I hold by, and I will not do that, even if no one is watching. Our story today in Acts chapter 5 is about Ananias and Sapphira. Well, one particular commentary on this story says that Ananias and Sapphira attempted to get credit for a greater personal sacrifice than they had actually made by offering only part of the proceeds of a sale to the apostles and passing it off as if it were the whole amount. Well, that's it in a nutshell. If you fall asleep in the rest of this talk, that's it. Okay, you'll need to unpack it yourself when you wake up. But that's it. That's what I want to look at. That's what I want to explore. What was it that they did wrong? Well, they lied in order to get credit for something and to keep something for themselves. And it doesn't end up well. The story begins, well, it doesn't begin in chapter 5, it begins just in the end of chapter 4. So I said that already. Chapter 4, verse 36, we have this kind of comparison thing happening. In fact, the previous few verses talk about how the followers were sharing things one with another. And then it gives a specific example. Verse 36 of Acts chapter 4, Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. Now, it seems as though maybe putting it at the apostles' feet is a way of kind of betrothing something over, or letting it go from you to someone else. So he gives this money, and then it was used. Just a little example. He had a bit of land, bit of property, gives it away for the benefit of the rest of the believers. Okay, exhibit number 1. Exhibit number 2, we get at the beginning of Acts chapter 5. Now, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. Great so far. Verse 2. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Now, in and of itself, that's not a problem. But what is the problem? Well, we get that explained now in verse 3. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Now, it actually wasn't a problem that he kept some of the money. And Peter goes on to explain that. I'll read it in a moment. But here we have the problem is that he gave the money and made it out as though that was everything. Saying that it is everything, but not actually giving everything. Hold that thought. Because what Ananias is doing here, and what Peter points out to him about kept for yourself, it echoes something else that happened in the Old Testament. We get the story in Joshua chapter 7. It's about Achan, and this is when Jericho had fallen, and they were told, look, all of the plunder needs to go to the temple. It all belongs to God. And Achan sees a nice outfit and a bit of gold, a bit of silver, thinks, surely they won't miss a little bit. I'll keep it for myself. So he hides it in his tent, and there's a battle that happens afterwards, and they lose the battle. The Israelites lose the battle, and Moses is kind of like, well, sorry, not Moses. It was Joshua. Then Joshua's sort of, well, what's going on? And through another little process, another story, Achan is found out, and it ends up that Achan is actually stoned for this bad deed, for keeping something to himself. Peter says to Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit? It's not that the Holy Spirit didn't know, but that it was these people were filled with the Holy Spirit, these believers. Remember this day of Pentecost and other times that we read through this Holy Spirit, the presence of God being with these people. So when you come to the people, the body of believers, you are lying to the people and to God. And that's what Peter is telling him off. So seemingly Peter has this spiritual gift of foresight and insight into people's lives. It's kind of like later on in Acts chapter 13, Paul is in with Barnabas, funny enough, in Cyprus, and something happens. They're being discouraged, or at least there's a kind of competitive discussion between Elymas, the sorcerer, and Paul and one of the officials there in Cyprus. And Paul is just fed up with him after a while, and he says, look, are you going to keep going kicking against God? If so, well, you're going to be blind for a while. And sure enough, he was blind, and it says that he's groping around, asking for people to give him some help. But interestingly, it also says that, this is Acts chapter 13, it says that this official, he believes Paul, not because of the miracle, but because of the truth that Paul was saying. So Paul as well seems to then have this insight of something and being able to say something that will happen, and it happens. Come back to Acts chapter 5 then. Peter here has got the same kind of insight, and something is about to happen. Why have you lied to the Holy Spirit and kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Verse 4, didn't it belong to you before it was sold, and after it was sold? Wasn't the money at your disposal? So seemingly Peter is saying here, look, you didn't have to give all of it. It was yours anyway. You didn't even have to sell it. Although there are people in need, and thank you very much. But don't give something and make it out as though you're giving everything, but actually you're holding something back. Because that's deceptive. That's for personal gain, because actually you're looking for the credit of people, thinking, wow, Ananias Sapphira, that's really kind of you. Thank you so much. And people not knowing actually they've kept some of it back. Didn't it belong to you before it was sold, and after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied to man, but to God. Verse 5, when Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. Wow. A great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Verse 6, then the young man came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. Well, that was pretty quick. And what about a proper burial, a little ceremony and so on? Well, some commentators have suggested that maybe because of what has happened, he's considered, you have turned against God. You are a pure sinner, and therefore you don't deserve this. Others have said, well, this couldn't really be true, because surely his wife would know and be part of his burial and so on. Well, whatever it is, the writer Luke doesn't seem to be bothered, and the way that he writes to Theophilus, it's as though they would understand that this isn't a problem. Verse 7. But 3 hours later, after his wife came in, not knowing what had happened, Peter asked her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? He's giving her a chance. He's giving her an opportunity to say, actually, no. But what does she do? Remember, integrity is who you are when you think no one's watching. Well, everyone was watching her then. Yes, she said, that is the price. Verse 9, Peter said to her, how could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Well, testing the Spirit of the Lord reminds me a little bit of Exodus 17 and verse 2, where Moses says, why do you put the Lord to the test? It's something that you just simply shouldn't do. And also Moses in Deuteronomy 6 verse 16 says, don't test God as you did in Massah. They've done it once, and now Moses was saying, don't do it again, because it's not going to end well. How could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door. There's the first point in time, seemingly, in the story where she hears that her husband has died. She's just been tested herself. Is this the price? Yeah. How could you lie? How could you test God? The people who buried your husband, they're here now. And what does Peter say? And they will carry you out also. It seems as though Peter gives this death sentence. Verse 10, at that moment she fell down at his feet and died. Wow. Then the young man came in, and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. They said that they were giving everything, but they kept something back. And then they were challenged, at least Sapphira was challenged. Why do you test God? Why do you say one thing but do another? Verse 11, great fear seized the whole church. This is the first time that Luke in Acts refers to this body of believers, this assembly. That's what the ecclesia means, the assembly or community. And more specifically, it's got this inference to assembly of a body of believers, as opposed to the assembly that met in a synagogue. This was another assembly. The synagogue and the Old Testament people that assembled when the the Israelites were called this assembly that came together. These were the people of God. And now we've got this kind of reference given by Luke of the church, the ecclesia, the assembly, the new believers. Great fear seized the whole church, and all who heard about these events. Seems as though it wasn't just the believers that were amazed and worried. Wow. So what do we learn from this story? Well, we learn that there is a problem when we hold something back. When we say that we are following after God, that we are giving everything, but actually we're holding something back. And that's really what I want to challenge you with. Are you holding something back from God? What is it that you need to give? Maybe everyone else thinks that you're really doing well and you're giving everything, but you know that you're holding something back. What is it that you need to give to God today? To give that whole 100%. After all, Jesus gave everything for you. So why wouldn't you give everything of yourself for him? That song, All to Jesus I Surrender. I know I've referenced that song in this kind of context before, but it is a challenge, I know. It is difficult, I know. We are always tempted to want to claw something back, to do something for ourselves. But just like that widow, the story that Jesus told, that she gave this little coin. It wasn't the size of the coin, the amount of money that she was giving. It was the percentage that she gave. She gave everything. And that's what Jesus is looking for us. Not to make out as though we're giving everything, but actually we're keeping a good bit back for ourselves. But to give all of ourselves to Jesus. And when we do that, we will be a blessing to those around us. Remember the story. Remember and consider what it is that you're giving of yourself to God. But also remember this biblical principle that if you lied, you died. Stay safe. Stay saved.